Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I am going to be talking about, specifically I'm going to talk about tabletop role-playing games and online tools, right? So, tabletop role-playing games are a really interesting, they're a niche market, but they're a very interesting niche market that has some really unusual aspects. But the reason I'm going to talk about this topic today is because I heard some excellent coverage of it on the Tome Show. The Tome Show is one of the very, very best tabletop role-playing game. It's one of the best tabletop role-playing game podcasts that are out there. James Introcaso he's usually one of the main moderators, and he had a few guys on, and they were talking about Trapdoor Technologies. Trapdoor Technologies is a company that made online tools for tabletop role-playing games, and they just closed their doors. Now, they had a specific contract from Wizards of the Coast to make 5th edition tabletop role-playing game online tools, right? So that is a very, that's a great contract. It's about the best, that is the best contract you can get in the entire tabletop role-playing game community. So these guys had the very best possible tabletop role-playing game online tools contract that is possible. So it's a brand new version of the game with the biggest company there is, and they had to fold up and shut down their company, right? Now, this is really fascinating. Introcaso's it's on the Tome Show. I think it's like episode 144 or something in there. And it was excellent. It was really, really good coverage, right? And they had previously talked with Trapdoor Technologies and helped them with Kickstarters. And they had talked about a Kickstarter that Trapdoor Technologies had done, for a 5th edition tools for, like $400,000, right? Which did not get funded. And so I want to talk about this because I think this is a classic repeated mistake. So this is constantly done. This is Quicksand that literally dozens of tabletop role-playing game fans and creators have stepped into, fallen under the sand, and choked to death, right? Like metaphorically, of course. So one of the biggest ones of this, they didn't talk about it in the Tome Show, but is CCP. So CCP is a video game making company. And they went to make a Vampire the Masquerade MMO, massively multiplayer online game. And CCP, these guys, this isn't the shallow end of the pool. This is the deep end of the pools. These guys own Eve, which is a huge MMO about starships, right? So Eve's been around for well over a decade. These guys know what they're doing when it comes to making a tabletop role, making a MMO, to making a video game. That again, it was just like Trapdoor Technologies. Real people, real jobs, real buildings, like this isn't some guy's pet project. This is a real company that has been built to make online tools for tabletop role-playing games, okay? So here's my take on this. Building online tools for tabletop role-playing games is always a bad idea. End of sentence, period, right? And the reason why is they are fundamentally broken. So if you are a tabletop role-playing game fan, one of the biggest things that in my opinion, every tabletop role-playing fan really likes is new content, right? So you have a favorite game, or you have a favorite genre, or you have a favorite, intellectual property. A new game comes out, or a new source book comes out, and the new source book is right there, right? And you're like, oh my goodness, this is really exciting. I'm going to interact with this, and I'm going to play this new character, this new race. I'm going to use this new weapon. I'm going to use this new location. I'm going to interact with these new NPCs, whatever, right? And so always, whatever new book comes out, that's the new hotness. Everybody wants to do it. Everybody wants to play it, or some portion of your table does. And guess what? Guess where the online tools are? They're 3 to 6 months away from having that content. So that by the time they bring you that content, you don't care about it, right? It's not the new hotness. And the tabletop role-playing game creators have already created new hotness, which now, so like it's always this bittersweet situation. Now, there are some companies that have tried to address, and this problem cannot be fixed. And I've watched a lot of companies try to fix it. So what are some of the ways they've tried to fix it that have failed? Well, one of the ways that people have tried to fix this is by creating the online content at the same time you create the actual tabletop role-playing game content, right? And this is such a bad idea, right? Pathfinder is the closest that has ever been done to this. I think there has been some source books where they released the online content at the same time as the books, right? But the problem with this is it's just fundamentally broken. The biggest issue here is right now, and this may never change, tabletop role-playing games are a niche market. It is a small market. It is not a huge market. Like, it's, tabletop role-playing games are, hey, would you like to come play this game that lasts for 4 hours long, and you have to read at least 300 pages of content to be a player, and you have to read probably 600 to 900 pages of content to be a game master. The amount of people that are going to do that is a small group, right? And I think a great gauge of this is Matt Mercer is one of the best tabletop role-playing game masters out there. He has done more to push forward Dungeons & Dragons in the online community than anybody. He has a video that has 2 million views on it. So I think it's really safe to say that really, the worldwide tabletop role-playing game community is probably about 2 million people. Maybe it's double that, 4 million. But that is a super niche market, right? And so the biggest issue here is, in order to create online tabletop role-playing games, you have to get coders, you have to get developers, right? And those are expensive resources. Anyone who is smart enough to code and anyone who is smart enough to develop, same thing, coder or developer, programmer for anybody who's older, those terms are all synonymous, right? If you are going to deal with a coder, right, you got to bring real money to the table. And the reason why is there's a conga line of real companies that will hire them to do real work and pay them buku bucks, right? And you're not going to get that kind of money on a Kickstarter. Kickstarter is great for pet projects, but you don't run a real business on a Kickstarter, right? Not one that lasts for years or decades. And so it is my opinion, and so these are all just the technical problems of why online tools for tabletop role-playing games are a bad idea. The other issue is tabletop role-playing games are vinyl. People need to understand this. So what do I mean by that? Tabletop role-playing games were birthed in paper, right? And it's fine to take tabletop role-playing games to video games in material that is built as a video game, and people can interact with it, and as a video game, purely as a video game, right? Because there's a few good ideas in there, but even that is dangerous territory, right? But the reality is, the people who want to play tabletop role-playing games, generally, they are not that. There are absolutely people who are into tabletop role-playing games who like video games. I don't believe for 1 second that they really want those two things merged. Video games are a shadow of tabletop role-playing games. Really, a tabletop role-playing game is a far, far better system than, for telling stories and building friends and building friendships than video games are, right? So basically, when it's like taking a steak and turning it into a hamburger, right? Tabletop role-playing games are the steak, and the video games are the hamburger, right? It's for the masses, right? Whereas tabletop role-playing games are not for the masses. They're for people who like to tell collaborative stories and really dig reading hundreds of pages of rules. Those two groups are not the same, right? The Venn diagrams may overlap, but when you are building a commercial product on the Venn diagram slim, overlap of an already niche market, that is not going to be a successful business model. It's just a bad idea, right? And so So I really feel like fundamentally these tools are broken from the gate. They're always lagging. They're trying to fix a problem that doesn't exist, and Trapdoor Technologies, CCP, and there's another one like CodeMonk. There's 2 or 3 other companies at least that have proven this, and there are no companies that have unproven what I've said, right? And so now with all that said, right, let's talk about why this mistake continues to be made, where people try to make a commercial product for an online tool to help with tabletop role-playing games. There's a very logical reason why this mistake is made again and again and again. The reason why this mistake is made again and again is the Venn diagram. Tabletop role players, right? You get that circle. Coders. There is a huge overlap between this. Not all coders are tabletop role players. Not all tabletop role players are coders, but man, the overlap is significant. It is significant, right? So, so that's one of the reasons why is people who love tabletop role-playing games and love code get excited, don't do the math, and then think that they're going to be able to put butts in seats and actually have a real building with a real company and people with real jobs. Online tabletop role-playing game tools will never, ever support that. It's just, or maybe it would, but it's a decade away at minimum. And even then, in my opinion, I think it will never happen because tabletop role-playing games are vinyl. Now, I'm going to go back to that point and kind of press in on it, right? What is that? Vinyl is super hip and super niche, super pimp, right? Like, it's just for the coolest people. I hate to say it, tabletop role-playing games are the same thing. It's for the coolest people. Video games are too broad to be dealing with the type of super niche hipsters that really like tabletop role-playing games. So vinyl, it's a great thing, but it's this super old product that has become very hip. And that is what tabletop role-playing games are. They're a super old product that is incredibly hip, right? And so that's my take is this, and the only reason I'm saying this is I don't want to see I don't want to see Kickstarters waste hundreds of thousands of dollars. I don't want to see people get hired and then get fired for this same mistake, just because people who love tabletop role-playing games got excited and people who love code got excited and didn't do the math, right? So that's why I'm bringing this out. That's why I'm talking about it. And I really again want to point you to James Intricasso's work on Tone Show. Absolutely fantastic. Any other thoughts I have on this? I'm just kind of bringing this to a close, wrapping up. Or actually, so I did want to. There were a couple more things on this. So so with all this said, right? There are people who use online tabletop role-playing game tools. There's a small number of people who are saying, hey, I'm willing to forgo the new stuff to play with online tools only. Or, one of the things I do is I actually use a tool that is online for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition to track my spells. I find dealing with spells in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, all of the editions, challenging. Online tools are really helpful for this. I keep, and I do keep my character sheets online in just a notepad, right? And I do use laptops, all this stuff, right? But the reality is I don't need any tools for any of this. I just use Google Docs, and I use a million free tools that are already available. That's another issue is all of these tools are vying against already great organizational tools that already exist, that are already out there, right, to do. So what should we really use online tabletop role-playing game tools for, and how should they be built? Well, I'm not against people going ahead and building online tools for tabletop role-playing games, as long as they follow the following steps, right? And the only reason I'm even saying this is, again, to multiple times now, coders have, given up jobs and gone and gotten fired, right? Believed in a company and then gotten canned, right? When there have already been echoes that this is a bad idea time and time again, right? So here's what you do. You can build these online tools. No problem. Go ahead, do it. But realize it's a pet project and do it for free, right? So I am super into coders doing these as open source projects where the code is open source, which means that if this guy gets bored and stops running the server, somebody already has a copy of the online code, can set it up on a new server. Anybody who gets excited about it can put their content elsewhere. Oh, I'm going to throw out another one. Obsidian Portal, right? I listened to those guys' podcasts for a long, long time. That is another online tool, for tabletop role-playing games that is struggling, very, very struggling. Great website. They work their butt off on that, and it's folding up, right? And there are literally, dozens or hundreds of game masters and players who have content on that website that now has a sword of Damocles, just swinging over it because nobody knows when the servers are going to shut down, right? So my point is, go to town, have fun, build all your online tools you want for tabletop role-playing games because it's a fun project. I get why people want to do this for a job because it's super fun, right? Especially if you're a coder and you're a tabletop roller. But make it a hobby, make it a pet project. Don't think anyone should ever spend $1 on this, right? These are good open source projects, and the key for everybody involved is if you are putting content into any of these tools, or if you are building these tools, make sure that you can export everything out quickly, both the code and the content. You've got to be able to do both, right? And if you are following that, making it a hobby, making all the content easily exportable, making the code available so that it can be put onto new servers, or the project can be picked up by new people when you either get married or have a baby, or get eaten by a monster or hit by a comet, whatever, right? All those things, then that's a great way to do it. So, one, I appreciate, so if I sound frustrated, the only reason I'm frustrated is, I'm an information technology guy, and, I'm blessed to have I'm blessed to have a steady job, and I know how hard it is to get jobs. And so my biggest point in this entire thing is to save people from the silliness of putting actual US dollars into Kickstarters that deal with these kind of silly, that deal with these fundamentally broken tools, and also to save any poor coder from touching anything like this, to, moving their home or giving up a good job to go work on these. These are, this is just a bad idea. So that's my take on it. Take care, everybody.